You ever like find one of those handwritten notes tucked inside like an old book, maybe from the author?
Yeah.
That's kind of what reading the words of Mormon feels like.
Right.
It's this personal section right in the Book of Mormon, almost like a letter from Mormon himself.
Yeah.
The guy who compiled the whole thing to his son, Moroni.
And let's be clear, this isn't just some how's it going kind of letter. Mormon is writing with this real sense of urgency, you know?
Yeah.
Almost like he's saying, son, things are about to get real, so listen up.
Right. He even says he expects Moroni will actually witness, like, the complete destruction of their people.
Oh, wow.
Talk about setting a somber mood. It makes you wonder, what kind of experiences would lead him to believe that things were going to get that bad?
And that's where it gets even more interesting. He doesn't just launch into the historical account. He actually talks about how he's compiling it,
Right.
mentioning plates passed down from prophets, but then he admits he can't include everything.
So he's basically saying, I'm picking the most important stuff here, folks.
Right.
It's like he's curating a historical highlight reel, choosing the stories and the teachings he thinks will matter most.
Exactly. And that is crucial to keep in mind as we dive in here because, you know, we're not getting a neutral, objective history. This is a deliberately chosen narrative. It's designed to teach specific lessons.
Okay, so with that context in mind, who does Mormon focus on? Well, one of the first figures we meet is King Benjamin.
Okay.
Now, I know righteous king might sound kind of cliche,
Right.
but trust me, this guy had his work cut out for him.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The text describes him as a holy man, you know, really paints a picture of his character. But it quickly becomes clear that being righteous doesn't shield you from problems.
Right.
He's dealing with internal conflicts, external threats from the Lamanites. You name it, this guy's dealing with it.
Yeah. It's almost as if Mormon wants to emphasize that even the most, devout, the most faithful leaders, they still face huge challenges. And this idea that, faith doesn't equal an easy life, that's a recurring theme throughout the Book of Mormon, isn't it?
It certainly is. And those challenges weren't just about, physical battles or political maneuvering or anything like that. Mormon highlights a different kind of threat, one we might even recognize today.
Okay.
The rise of false Christs and false prophets.
Now, that's interesting. It's like, on top of everything else, they had to deal with misinformation and spiritual phonies even back then.
Oh, yeah.
Makes you wonder who these figures were, how they gained influence.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the need to discern truth from falsehood,
Right.
that's a constant throughout history, right?
Yeah.
And it's particularly critical in a society that places such high value on spiritual guidance and prophetic leadership.
That's a great point. So we're starting to see a pattern here.
Okay.
We've got this righteous leader
Right.
facing, external and internal pressures.
Yeah.
We've got this ever-present challenge of separating truth from lies.
Right.
What else does Mormon want us to understand about this period?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, separating truth from lies, because Mormon actually gives us a little detail that really speaks volumes about how they approached this problem.
Okay.
He mentions that those spreading falsehoods were actually punished according to their crimes.
Oh, wow. So they weren't messing around.
No.
That suggests they took this issue of spiritual deception very, very seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
Like there were real consequences for misleading people in, matters of faith.
Yeah, and that connects back to their whole belief system.
Right.
Remember, they saw their society as divinely guided.
Yeah.
So to undermine that guidance was a very serious thing. But it wasn't just about punishment.
No.
It was also about protection.
Protection. How so?
Well, remember, Mormon's not just focusing on the negative here. He also highlights how King Benjamin relied on these holy prophets, right, to help him navigate those really tumultuous times. And it emphasizes that even amidst all these challenges, there was this source of strength and wisdom to draw from.
So it's not just about King Benjamin's, own personal piety. It's this network of support.
Exactly.
This belief that, they weren't alone in trying to figure things out. And these prophets were crucial in guiding them, right? Guiding them back to righteousness.
Absolutely. And they weren't afraid to take an active role. In fact, the text describes them speaking the word of God with power and with authority. So these weren't just passive observers, right? They were actively trying to shape their society, challenging complacency and calling people back to what they believed was the right path.
It reminds me of, even today, how religious leaders, they grapple with these contemporary issues.
Right.
Speaking out against injustice or offering moral guidance.
Right.
There's this timeless element to that, this idea of relying on some kind of spiritual authority when times are uncertain.
Yeah. That's a great parallel, because Mormon wants us to understand that these prophets, they weren't afraid to hold people accountable, even if it meant, using strong words or tough love sometimes. Remember that phrase, stiff-neckedness?
Yeah.
They were dealing with people who were very resistant to change, people set in their ways.
Which, makes sense when you think about the turmoil they were facing, right?
Yeah.
Like, change is hard.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with internal divisions, external threats.
It is.
It takes a certain kind of leadership to kind of guide people through those storms.
And that's precisely what Mormon wants us to take away from this. Remember, he's carefully selecting these details for a reason. He wants to show us not just the challenges they faced,
Right.
but also the importance of strong, righteous leadership.
Okay.
Especially leadership that's grounded in spiritual guidance.
It's like he's saying, look, this is how they navigated their challenges. Maybe we can learn something from their example.
Exactly. And that brings us to, I think, a really crucial point. Mormon doesn't want us to just see this as some distant, irrelevant history, right? He directly connects these events to our lives today.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, he makes that really clear earlier on. Remember when he says he's preserving these records so that maybe, someday they might actually profit someone? He wasn't just talking about his own time. He was speaking directly to us, the readers of the Book of Mormon.
It's like he's reaching through the centuries saying, hey, this stuff matters. You might be facing different challenges, but the core principles, they still apply.
Precisely. And that's where his choice to include, those prophecies and revelations, it becomes so fascinating, because he clearly believed that these prophecies, they held the key to understanding not just the past, but also the future. He's encouraging us to kind of see our own lives within this larger spiritual narrative.
Yeah.
One that stretches from those early days all the way to the present.
So it's not just about learning these dry historical facts. It's about finding guidance, finding meaning and applying it to our own lives, recognizing those patterns of history and how certain choices, they played out, both the good and the bad.
Exactly. The Words of Mormon is a call to action, right? It's Mormon urging us to learn from the past, to seek spiritual guidance, and to really strive for righteousness in our own lives, just like King Benjamin and those early prophets did.
It really personalizes the whole thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Suddenly these ancient stories, they feel incredibly relevant to our modern world.
And that's the brilliance of it, because, by connecting these really personal stories to these much larger theological ideas, Mormon elevates them beyond just simple historical accounts. He wants us to really grapple with those really big questions, about faith, about leadership, about discerning truth, just as those early communities did.
So we're left with this sense that history, it isn't just something that we read about in textbooks.
Right.
But it's this living tapestry.
Yeah.
And it continues to shape who we are and what we believe even today.
Yeah. And the Words of Mormon, with its raw honesty and its urgency, it reminds us that even those who lived, centuries ago, they faced these remarkably similar challenges. They wrestled with doubt, they sought truth, and they tried to build a better world in the midst of immense difficulty.
It's a powerful message, one that transcends time and circumstance.
It truly is. And as we kind of close our deep dive into the Words of Mormon, I'm left with this sense of gratitude for Mormon's dedication to preserving these stories, because he knew their value, not just as historical records, but as guideposts for future generations.
Like he's saying, hey, here's what we've learned, good and bad. Now go out and make your own history, but do it with your eyes wide open.
Beautifully put. The Words of Mormon, it's more than just an introduction. It's an invitation to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deeper truths that connect us all.